early projects, company culture, and a glimpse into the future. Today we review the history of Radiance Technologies and what exciting new things the company has planned for its future. I'm Connor Griffith, and welcome to our Chit-Chat. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 1 of Radiance Chit-Chats, our very own podcast series. Joining me today are CEO Bill Bailey and President Dave D'Addario to talk about the ups and downs of starting a business and growing it into something truly great. Guys, go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Yes, I'm Bill Bailey. I'm the CEO at Radiance.
Thanks, Connor. I'm Dave D'Addario. I'm the president of Radiance.
And thank you both again for being here, guys. I really appreciate you putting in some time in your busy schedules to join me today. Bill, I'm actually going to start with you. And before we jump in, I want to give all of our listeners who may or may not know, just give a little background about you at Radiance. We'll start. How long have you been with the company?
18 and a half years.
Man, that's a long time. So during all of that, what brought you to Radiance?
What brought me to Radiance? Probably John and George.
Mm-hmm.
And I met John at a shrimp boil for his son when he was getting married, and we worked together. And that started a dialogue with John and continued with a dialogue with George, and then it wound up with me and Brian and Ricky and Jerry, and
right.
A lot of us winding up over here in a close proximity of each other.
Understood. So, what roles since joining Radiance have you occupied? You know, you're CEO now.
I was senior engineer, and then I was a team lead, and then a manager, group manager. I forget what we call it back then. A manager of a small unit, and then I became a director of a larger unit, and then vice president, senior vice president, and president, and now the CEO.
So you definitely say you've played many hats while you've been here.
Pretty much.
That's awesome. So we'll jump in. Bill, I want to talk to you primarily about kind of the first 10 years of the company. And I want to start just kind of the name, Radiance Technologies. How was the name decided?
Well, when they came over here, they had this program that they were working called BOA, Battlefield Ordnance Awareness, and it was an optical program. And the second program they brought with them was a hyperspectral program. See, the first four that came over here, John and George, had been friends for a long time, right. And then they brought Scott Dublin, who they'd worked with together at Nichols, and then they went and got another guy, Paul Filliger. And the reason they got those four is because by bringing those four and starting a company, they pretty much knew they would be able to completely support one whole group at SMDC that would have no other company in there playing. Mm-hmm. And so I guess it was kind of walling off their market space, claiming their turf. And so anyway, the programs that existed in there were optical programs, sensor programs. And so they picked up the name Radiance because one of the test programs was using a camera. I believe it was Indigo Systems, wasn't it, Dave?
I believe so.
And the name of the camera was Radiance.
Oh, okay.
So that's how they decided to use Radiance Technologies.
Right.
Radiance is an optical term. And then it being a camera.
That's actually really cool. So you're talking about those founding few. Was that just that small group of 7 or 8 guys?
Just those 4 guys. It was John, George, Scott Dublin, and Paul Filliger that were the 4. The infamous coffee cup picture, we call it. They're standing over a card table, which was their first piece of office furniture, toasting each other.
So what got them involved in this world? Why did they want to start a company?
John and George had worked together at a place called Sparta. Mm-hmm. And after the peace dividend, it kind of scaled back. So George wound up going to Nichols. John wound up consulting with Nichols. And Nichols was a bigger company at that time, 3,500 people or so. And so they missed the small business. Sparta was a small business. They missed being a small business, being employee-owned. Sparta was employee-owned. And fundamentally, our model of employee ownership was a hybrid of the Sparta model. George never liked it when you said that, but we were almost exactly the same way they were. And so they decided to go on their own and do this.
Right. And so moving forward, what were some of the main projects or contracts that really launched Radiance into the world of prime contracting?
Well, at the time I came over here, they had the BOA program, and that evolved into Overwatch, which evolved into a hardware program. So that's what got us into the hardware world. And from there, Overwatch evolved to Weapon Watch, and it evolved to GFAS. So that's how we got into not just hardware, but aviation platforms as well. And that was our biggest program for probably the first 10 years.
Absolutely.
Revenue-wise, personnel-wise. They brought my second conversation with Radiance was they wanted to hire a group that would help them diversify. So they brought us over to get into the Intel world and the Air Force world. Mm-hmm. And we brought in a couple of FME programs. And from there, we were able to parlay that into what is now cyber, what is CSG, what is TIG, a large portion of ESG, because we got into the directed energy programs and those kinds of things. Pete Whalen, we got 5 groups now, but traditionally we had 4 groups. A group that Pete had started and built, the group that Brian Johnson, myself, and Jerry started and built. Then the prototyping and the hardware group was George's group, and then we had a Kirk DeWeese group, which was operational intel, what used to be OIG. And the groups that we have them now is kind of a modern phenomenology. We reorged to the 5 groups, or the 4 that we currently have now, about 5 years ago.
Sure, and it's no doubt that these clearly caused a lot of growth within the company. If you flash forward just to 2008, Radiance now had offices in 13 different states with over 300 different employees. What were some of the things outside of these projects that Radiance was doing to help keep that growth going?
I think that was the employee ownership model in our culture. You get people had skin in the game, and people were going out and attracting and doing recruiting to get people in here. I mean, once upon a time, it was all us recruiting our friends and our neighbors. We didn't have the Keith Bradleys or Lyles or those kinds of guys.
Sure.
So we did it all. There was a time when, we didn't. I was here when they hired the human resources person, and we didn't have a contracts person, and the security person we had was not formally trained to be a security person.
Sure,
we kind of did it all ourselves. But I always think the key to our success has always been our culture and the employee ownership model.
Absolutely. And 2008 also saw many of the things, not just the ESOP program. It was our 10th year anniversary, and
John Dennis retired.
Correct. Just a few short months later, John, and then in 2012, George Clark actually left as president, and you became the president. And now in 2019, you are the CEO. What has that change in your role in the company done, not just for you as a person, but what do you think it'll do to help expand the company?
Well, I mean, right. As we transition this thing, I think at the end of the day, you've had since the day the company started one guy performing both roles. Mm-hmm. Okay, but as you get bigger, one guy can't do that.
Sure.
You got to have a president who focuses on the near term and running the company. Okay, and then you got to have somebody focusing on the 3 to 5 year long term, and how do we continue to grow, and how do we posture ourselves. We've gotten big enough to that one person can't do that. And when I say you got to have a president and a CEO, one's got to do the strategic and one's got to run the company.
Absolutely.
And that can flip depending on the personalities of the people and the company that you're in. I tend to enjoy the strategic long-term stuff.
Sure.
I hope Dave loves the short-term herd the cat stuff, because that's his job.
Right.
Well, we're headed for issues.
No, I understand. I think it's a great thing that we can say that about our company, that we've gotten to the point where we needed to split that up and let you both focus on the things you see as your power sides. Dave, I'll hop over to you, get a couple of questions out. We'll start just like we did with Bill. How long have you been with the company?
So I've been with the company right at 10 years.
Right at 10. What brought you to Radiance?
So I had the opportunity to come to Radiance about 15 years ago. George Clark was trying to hire me, and looking back, it was probably one of the biggest mistakes of my career. I decided not to make that jump at that time. But 5 years later, Dan Jones, who was the executive vice president, found out I was looking for a job, and I worked in and around Dan for 20 years. He was one of the elder statesmen here in Huntsville, and had the opportunity to come work with Dan, and that was really the reason I came here. was that opportunity to work with him. And despite the fact he did not want to be a mentor and he did not like that mentor moniker, he was one of those people I kind of viewed as having mentor qualities. So I very much look for that opportunity to come work for him.
Absolutely. Well, it's good that you had that connection. So once they finally dragged you on board, what were some of the roles that you occupied during your time?
So I came in to kind of head up working for Dan, looking at NBA work. We had a little bit at the time. The Midas efforts had just kind of started, but I'd kind of gotten embroiled. There was a NASA contract that was coming out. I worked capture on it, and even though, much to the amusement of my boss, Bill, sat back thinking that there was no way we were going to win, we chased after that contract and out at NASA and ended up winning and started doing some work out at NASA. And from there I've got a history working with SMBC, so got involved with our CTAC effort, got involved with the D3I effort, and from there took on a role as the lead for our strategic initiatives group, and then became the chief strategy officer, and then in last year Bill promoted me to president.
Right. So you've been here long enough. You've clearly seen all the growth that's been going on throughout the company. What would you say, during that time, Radiance was transitioning from small into medium, and now we're almost approaching large. What are some of the challenges that we've faced, not just with, contractual requirements, but with employees coming in, with new culture starting?
So as we continue to grow and moving into that, what is called the mid-tier, and getting our processes and getting our company a little bit more formal. As a 100-person company, there's a lot of things that you can do by the seat of your pants. As you get to be larger and larger, there are things that you kind of have to start putting a little bit of structure to. You still want to maintain the agility of that small business. You still want to be able to go and get decisions rapidly. You don't want to become one of these super large businesses like the Boeings or the Lockheeds, where it takes weeks to get a decision. But by the same token, you kind of have to start putting a little bit of rigor and a little bit of process. The other piece of it is how you maintain and how you keep that cultural aspect of the company. Back in probably 2013, 2014, we kind of met this milestone where we had as many people outside of Huntsville as we had inside. And so there's as many people away from the flagpole as there are right next to it. And so we're trying to maintain and keep that culture alive and keep the Radiance brand and that Radiance culture and the things that make us special becomes harder and harder as we have more and more people. And that's true no matter what, whether we had all those people here in Huntsville or not, because as you bring in more people, it becomes more imperative to keep that cultural aspect of the company. And so keeping those touch points, the fact that we are employee-owned, the fact that we are agile, the fact that we do believe in technical excellence, that we are here for the warfighter. All of those things, in my mind, coalesce into those things that make us who we are.
I completely agree. I understand that the balance of process and culture can be tough, especially as we're going to grow. It's only going to get more difficult, like you said, to maintain that reach between our internal employees and our on-site versus off-site. We had one user submitted question for this episode from Charlene Redmer out in Fort Gordon. She was actually wondering about that culture. You had talked about that balance. What she wanted to know specifically, what are some of those cultural changes that we've had to implement over the years, going from the early years to now? What updates have we done, and what have you seen become different in the employee culture moving into where we are now?
Thanks, Connor, and thanks to Charlene. That's a great question. So that is, keeping our culture alive is, as I said, is very important to us, and it has gotten harder, but over the years. But the things that we've done and implementing, we started off as an employee-owned and implemented this employee ownership model from the get-go. And we feel like that's been one of the keys to our culture. And then back in 2018, obviously, we went into that 100% ESOP, which we felt was even more important to get that ownership out to everybody. But when you sit there and you look at who we are, we've made significant investments and continue to make significant investments into the company. We've always had a very, what I thought was a very rich benefits program. But this year we have added to that richness. We've added benefits. We've enriched some of the already strong benefits we've had. We last year we stood up Radiance University and spent, I believe, $500,000 last year investing in training of our employees and our employee owners. You know, one of the things that we do every year that I think is just key to our keeping our culture alive is our annual business meeting. It is something that requires a lot of work. There's a lot that goes into it, but it is so important to our employees and is so important to keeping our culture alive by bringing our employees from all different areas into a casual team environment where get to know each other, where they can talk, where they can share, and keep that collaboration going. And the annual meeting is probably one of the most important things we do. You know, we stress employee engagement, and we go and do a lot of things in terms of getting out to our employees. We try to get out and get open communications, whether it's newsletters, whether it's emails, whether it's our open door policy, whether it's town halls. We try to get those things out so that people know what's going on. You know, there's not a day goes by that I don't get some sort of email, phone call. And so somebody drops by if they're in town. So all of those things in my mind kind of lead to trying to keep that culture going.
Thank you, Charlene. That was a really awesome question. Dave, thank you so much for going a little more in depth on that one. It's really it's good to hear from management that you guys you're focused on it, you're aware of the issues, you're willing to make changes to help just for the betterment of the company. So my last thing for you, Dave, just getting more into your daily life specifically. Bill had touched on your promotion just a little bit, but in your own words, what are you now focusing on with this realignment into your new role? What are you going to be doing to help with the company?
So, as Bill said, Bill's going to be looking at providing the vision and looking at, from a strategic viewpoint, where things need to go. My job's going to be taking that strategic vision, taking that and going out and implementing it, figuring out how to make it work and how to go do and making it happen. I like to think of it as I have the best of both worlds. I get to look both up and out as well as down and in. And so I'm, as Bill said, that I'm herding the cats and that I'm making things work and that we're coming in, we're meeting our sales, we're going in the direction and doing the things that Bill has kind of given us a vision to go do.
Right, and I probably speak for a lot of folks when I say we can see that change. We see you both much more active in your different roles now. So that's great. Thank you, Dave. I think that gets us caught up to now. Bill, the last couple of questions, we're going to hear about Radiance's ideas for the future. Looking into our future years, I'd say one of the biggest things we've got coming up is actually our transition into becoming a large business. What do you see as maybe our timeline to breach that threshold, and what do you think are going to be some of the challenges we're going to face once we get there?
I would say 5 years. It could be 3, could be 7, but so I'll put a stake in the ground at 5 years. What are some of the challenges? Well, we're working those now. I've spent a lot of time with many CEOs who have taken companies through that threshold and talked to them. I started this 5-6 years ago. What did you do right? What did you do not so right? If you had it to do over again, what would you do differently? And you see some of those changes, some of our restructuring, the creating an executive staff, the budgeting process, the waterfall process. We started implementing the processes that were needed to go into a large business a couple of years ago. First started when I made Brian the COO and got him to start doing the waterfalls and stuff. So I think we'll be okay on the processes. At the end of the day, we're not going to wind up. That will probably be an acquisitional play-in somewhere when we're getting close.
Right.
Okay, because you just don't want to wind up 15, 20. You want to wind up 1,700, 1,800.
Right.
You want to do what I call the Nichols model. Nichols was small. They grew fast. They got to the small business model, and then they went from just about the threshold to be a large business to being 3,500 people in a matter of about 2 to 3 years. I'm not going to go that wild with acquisition, but it becomes a matter of scale. But quite honestly, to mitigate the risk, me and a group of other people have worked to change the way they count small business. So go back about 5 years ago, it used to be 500, 750, and 1,000. And we lobbied Congress and we've got it to where it's 1,000, 1,250, and 1,500 today. So that's pushing it out. It's a risk mitigation. In last year's National Defense Authorization Act, we were able to lobby Congress and get it from being employee count over a rolling 12-month period to employee count over a rolling 5-year period. So I think that buys us at least 2.5 years.
Oh, yeah.
More than that. I'm going up this year to lobby Congress to try to get the way they count heads to be different. And so that if I'm successful at that, then we'll get another couple of years. So that instead of, that's the reason I say 5 or 7, to be quite honest with you. And that's just risk mitigation. But at the end of the day, we're trying to wean ourselves off of small business set-aside contracts. IMD and Megastar was a hedge against ATEP being a small business contract. We bid some of this Oasis stuff for the full and open things as a hedge against CTAC and some of our current Oasis stuff. We're parlaying prime versus sub positions at AMRDET right now so that we can get ourselves postured well in that world. So, I think there will be problems, but it won't be problems that we didn't anticipate. We won't be the first company to ever done this. And like I said, I've talked to companies that have done it and their CEOs, very good relationships. And so we kind of understand what we got ahead of us and we're working toward it.
So I know I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Radiance University in all of this. Without that growth initiative, we wouldn't be here recording this podcast today. And without giving too many spoilers, are there any future growth initiatives that we're working on to get not just employee engagement, but also employee growth?
We're working on a mentoring program. Okay, and we already have a mentoring program that Lane and I worked on and started for the executives last year. She was rolling out a mentoring program for at the lower levels this year. The Radiance U, the mentoring, the leadership things that you're seeing coming in. We can sit here and talk about the biggest risk that Radiance will face in the future. Okay, and you can talk about a business risk, you can talk about economic risk, a market risk. But if you ask me, the biggest risk we face is not having the leadership to perpetuate this thing in about 10 years. So I would say if Lane and I are both modulating pretty well on this one, and we're synchronized in that if I have anything important to do in the next 5 years or 10 to make sure this thing can last forever, not just the processes of the business, but just to make sure we got robust leaders with the right experience, the right training, who believe with every fiber of their souls and heart that this employee ownership model is special. So if I'm going to do anything to have an impact over the long haul, over the next 5 to 10 years, is to make sure we've created a broad and deep pool of candidates to manage this company. So you're going to see a lot of those kinds of things happen. A lot more investment in Radiance U. We wanted to do the master's degree. I had originally thought about an MBA. We pulled off the engineering management, which, through Lane's, what a wonderful thing that was. That's a nice balance between an MBA and a engineering degree. But leadership, if I'm driven to anything, is to make sure we've got the leadership. We got good leaders. There's just not enough of them.
So the focus is more on empowering our current leaders, not so much
empowering our employees in general. You got to do 2 things, okay? And this was part of the pushing the ESOP to conversion and pushing the ownership out. Was you got to do 2 things. You got to make sure you got leaders capable of doing it. And if by chance one gets into a key position that's not capable of doing it, then you need a workforce that's educated and got enough control to fix that problem on their own, and not allow him to be a John Jumper and sell the company out from under him.
Well, that's been great information. Bill and Dave, thank you both so much for being here today. For all of our listeners tuning in, please don't forget to check us out online at radiancetech.com/Radiance University. We'll also be sending out an internal link to our employees straight to the podcast. For everyone else who's outside, please be sure to tune in on Spotify and iTunes for all your streaming needs.